Heart of Tin, Chapter 6. The next morning dawned clear and sunny. I polished my arms and legs and torso until the metal gleamed like mercury in a morning sun. I got my crown out of the Winky-sized wardrobe in one corner of my room and polished that too, setting it on top of my head when it glowed as brightly as my tin skin. I finished my preparations just as Norbert knocked softly at my door, announcing that my subjects were assembled in the courtyard as I had requested. His suspenders, I noticed, were new, and his suit jacket had been ironed sometime since last night. Even his shoes were buffed. He wouldn't meet my eyes, for some reason, and I almost asked him what had gotten into him lately. The Winkies were gathered in a noisy, chattering group in the large courtyard in front of the palace's main door, but they fell silent as soon as I came out of the palace, eyeing one another. Nobert bobbed obsequently at my side, wiping his furry brow with a spotted handkerchief. I surveyed them with my heart sinking a little. They were really sort of, unimpressive. And there wasn't that many of them either. But Oz was not exactly a land noted for its martial power, and Winkies could be as courageous as anybody if they were given the chance. I noted with approval that they were standing carefully as not to trample the lovingly cultivated flower beds. They might be silly and undisciplined, but that was at least a start. What matters most was that Dorothy would see how much I cared, how much I was thinking about her. My most devoted subjects, I began, gazing out over their upturned faces. It has been a great honor to be your ruler, and I am proud to have done such an excellent job overseeing your welfare. I have gathered you here today to alert you to a number of important things that are taking place in Oz. Their faces were blank, undaunted. I continued. I am afraid I have some disheartening news about Princess Ozma. Though we believed her to be good and a kind ruler, she has in fact betrayed us. At this, the Winkies exchanged startled glances. I have learned that she had been stealing magic of Oz from her own purposes. But all will soon be well, for something wondrous has happened. My cloth heart soared in my chest. There was something about saying it out loud that made it really true. The beloved Dorothy Gale has returned to Oz to help us. A murmur of astonishment rippled through the little crowd. Dorothy, the witch slayer? Piped up a young Winky in the back, who was quickly hushed by his fellows, but I didn't mind the interruption. The one and very same, I said proudly. When Oz was in need before, she came to us, and now that Oz needs her again, she has returned to us. The Winkies didn't need to know that I still hoped in my heart of hearts that she'd come from me. She came to convince Ozma to return the magic she had stolen to the land, but Ozma refused. In the ensuing battle, Ozma cast a terrible spell that erased her own memory. Dorothy, in her generosity and selflessness, has agreed to govern Oz temporarily until a new ruler can be found. In the meantime, she will need an army to protect her. That army, my dear subjects, shall be you. The Winkies were staring at me open-mouthed. I frowned slightly. I had expected them to be more excited. Maybe I just hadn't made myself clear. We will leave for the Emerald City tomorrow, I added. Prepare yourselves. I do not know when you will return to this country. Her duty is to Dorothy, and we will serve her as long as she needs us. The Winky who'd spoken before was waving his hand furiously, and I nodded in his direction. He cleared his throat. I'm sorry, he said less politely than I thought was appropriate. You said all of us are leaving for the Emerald City? Tomorrow? That is correct, I said. But I don't want to go to the Emerald City, he said. To my astonishment, several other Winkies nodded in agreement. But of course you want to go to the Emerald City, I replied. This is Dorothy we're talking about, Dorothy Gale, who killed the Wicked Witches, who's given up everything for Oz. It's our responsibility to keep her safe, after everything she's done for us. Your responsibility, maybe, the Winky said. Why should it be ours? Because I am your king, I said. But muttering had spread through the crowd, and now more Winkies were raising their hands to speak. I don't know any Dorothy, one of them shouted, and was shushed by her fellows. But more and more of them were grumbling. I raised my voice in an effort to speak over them. It is not a request, I shouted. It is an order. You will all be heroes. I demand it. How do we even know this is true about Ozma? Snapped the original dissenter. Ozma is a fairy. Maybe she just knows better than what the magic of Oz should be used for. Hear, hear, someone else shouted. As more and more of them protested, my disbelief turned to anger. Here I was, offering them the opportunity of a lifetime, and they were worried about technicalities? I was their king, even if they didn't want to help Dorothy, as impossible as that was to believe. I was in charge, not some whining, winky teenager. Silence! I bellowed. And now they were ignoring me completely, and some of them were even heading for the palace gates as though to return home. How dare they, after everything I'd given up for them? Dorothy had killed the Wicked Witch of the West and freed the enslaved Winkies. When she had first come to Oz, I had been at her side, obviously, and in fact, she wouldn't have been able to defeat the witch without my help. Not at all. But her act of bravery had left the Winkies without a ruler, and so the wizard had appointed me their king all those years ago. He didn't ask me what I wanted. Nobody ever did, as a matter of fact. Not even Dorothy, if I'm being completely honest. But I was like Dorothy. I cared more about the good of Oz than my own personal needs. I had a perfectly good heart, one the wizard had given me, and while it naturally belonged to Dorothy, all the years after she left Oz, I had assumed I would never see her again. But instead of doing the things other people did, falling in love, having adventures, seeing the world, I'd stayed here, in this backwater little palace. I could have gone anywhere, done anything. I could have found... Well, I never could have found a replacement for Dorothy. But maybe I could have found someone I'd loved almost as much. I could have had a life. Instead, I've given up everything for the Winkies, for these ungrateful, foolish, nasty little trolls. At my side, Norbert cleared his throat, adjusting his pince-nez. Well, sir, he said quietly, I suppose that will be all then? No, I said, that will not be all. I could feel my outrage transforming into something bigger and stronger and meaner. A sudden breeze sprang up, bringing it with it a tiny cyclone of pink strawberry-scented glitter, and for a moment I could almost see Glinda hovering above the Winkies' heads, smiling at me. I will lend you the power to control them, brave Tin Woodman, her voice whispered in my ear. You will show them the glory and the might of Oz. The glitter swirled around me, whirling around my arms and my hands. The metal of my fingers began to glow hot red, as though I'd left them in a fire, and started to melt and change shape. To my astonishment, my fingers began to transform before my eyes. They sprouted long, thin needles and short-bladed knives, all sharp and wicked-looking. As soon as the transformation was complete, the metal cooled again, gleaming dangerously in the morning light. For just a moment, my heart pulsed with doubt. But these are weapons, I said out loud. Glinda tisk-tisked in my ear. I turned around, expecting to see her, but there was no one. What we do for the good of Oz, my noble friend, she whispered. What will Dorothy do if you cannot protect her? Who will she turn to if you are not at her side? I will choose another protector if you are not man enough for the task. Jealousy sparked up in me like a forest fire. There would be no question of Glinda's choosing someone else. I would be at Dorothy's side for always. I would show these filthy Winkies how powerful I was if they did not obey me out of duty. Stand where you are, I snarled at the Winkies, who were by now pouring toward the palace gates. Something in my voice stopped them in their tracks. Bring me the Winkies among you who have dared to defy me, I said, and even in my own ears, my voice was terrible. Glinda's cyclone of magic darted over the crowd, dusting them with some kind of enchantment. As if in a trance, the Winkies seized the traitors and dragged them toward my podium. Only the first Winky who'd spoken, the one who said he didn't want to go to the Emerald City, was trying to resist, struggling furiously, even biting at my arms, the arms of his captors. I would deal with him first. I gestured for them to bring him before me. This is my kingdom, I said in a low voice, and I knew it was strong enough to carry to the far edges of the crowd. I've allowed you to forget it. I will not make that mistake again. I wrapped my fingers around his neck and looked up at the assembled crowd. Tomorrow we march to the Emerald City, I said. From now on, this is how I will deal with traitors. The knives that had replaced my fingers cut into his flesh, and blood poured down his yellow fur and pooled at his dangling feet. He gurgled frantically as my fingers cut and cut all the way to the bone. Red light blazed around me, and the red of Dorothy's shoes pouring in through my open mouth and filling my entire body with a blinding, all-powerful rage. With a single gesture, I tore his head from his body and hurled it into the crowd, striking one of them square in the chest with a grisly smack. The Winkies stared at me, and I saw in grim satisfaction that their eyes were filled with utter horror and fear. Some of the Winkies were crying, but most of them in such terrified shock that they just trembled where they stood and gaped at me. I knew you were the right choice, Glinda's disembodied voice whispered next to me. I knew you were brave enough, Woodman. I looked down at my hands. They were still the strange new hands Glinda had given me, covered in blood. They looked even more menacing. More evil, I thought, and then shook my head. No, this wasn't evil. This was necessary. What we do for the good of Oz. She had been right. This was a new time. I couldn't back down. Dorothy needed me. Without thinking, I moved toward the next traitor in line with my hands outstretched when Norbert gave me a little cry. What is it? I snarled. Sir, Norbert said desperately. What are you doing? Why are you harming us? We'll obey you, sir. We understand how important Dorothy's army is now. Please don't hurt anyone else. I blinked, and suddenly the red mist that had filled me poured out of my eyes and mouth, rising up into the clear blue sky and taking it with an intense rage that had possessed me. Glinda's voice was gone. I looked around. There was blood everywhere. The headless body of a Winky lay on the ground, and a line of Winkies crashed before me, shaking in terror. Did I do that? I asked Norbert, confused. He looked at me in astonishment. Yes, sir, he said quietly. Why? I don't know, sir. You said it needed an army. The army! Of course! Dorothy's army! I wasn't entirely certain what had just happened, but if it meant I had an army to bring to my princess, it was surely for the best. I'd bring her an army, and then tell her how much I truly felt at last. How could she say no when she saw the evidence of my devotion? We marched for the Emerald City at dawn, I told the blood-splattered masses trembling at my feet. Shirkers and deserters will be executed. I turned my back on them and walked into the palace.